Well, we are finishing up, actually, the last week of our American Idols series. And it was a little 4-week series. And idols, if you remember when we were back at the beginning of this, are simply those things that take over our hearts. They take priority, and they prevent us from really living life and having what Jesus had for us. That's all hard idols are. And so there are some that are of particular concern for us in the Western world, in America. And so we've looked at 3. One was the idol of individualism, which is simply this pursuit of me, of putting me first in everything. And we said that if we want to kill this idol, we have to put first things first. It's all about where our priorities lie. Then the next week, we looked at this idol of consumerism, which is this idea of I want it, and I want it all, and I want it now. And we said, well, how do you kill that? It's really simply giving your life away to others, putting other people first. And then last week, we looked at this idol of materialism, which is the desire for more, thinking that our needs are going to be met or wanting to have more. And we said the way you deal with this idol is intentional generosity. Now, we want to kind of wrap this up today because the question that I thought might occur to you is, why are we looking at all this? Why have we spent 3 weeks on this? Because if the end result is some vague sense of guilt because you're not living right and you need to do better, then we've completely missed the point of this. So that's not what I want to leave us with. I don't want to leave us with this idea of, okay, well, I got to do better, I got to give more away, I got to try not to have these idols in my life. Then we've kind of not landed where we need to land. And so today I want to tie it all together. And I think this entire thing is encapsulated in 2 words. And it's 2 words that intuitively don't connect at all, but in fact are completely and utterly connected. And these are the 2 words: surrender and freedom. We don't tend to put these 2 words together, but what we're going to see is how they're linked. And in the end, it's surrender that brings freedom, especially when it comes to hard idols. Now, let me ask you this question. What does surrender look like to you? Show me. Come on, what does it happen? There you go, one guy in the back. Like this, right? It's the universal sign of surrender, which, by the way, is one of the reasons we encourage you to raise your hands in worship and praise, because it's a sign of surrender to our Heavenly Father. But that's the sign of surrender. We don't actually have a very positive view of surrender, do we? You know, in the end of World War II, on May the 2nd, 1945, nearly 1 million German and Italian soldiers surrendered to Field Marshal Harold Alexander. And then while that was going on in Germany, the Soviets were encircling Berlin. And on May the 7th, 1945, and you guys may have seen these pictures, Germany unconditionally surrendered. The United States, big ceremony, signing all this thing. There's a whole bunch of history behind this we won't get into. It's very interesting. And then, 4 months later, same happened in the Pacific. Unconditional surrender. See, because here's the thing. When we think of surrender, we think of giving up, of stopping fighting. It's acknowledging that the other person is stronger than me, and I have to give up. And we use this all the time. So if you say a sports team just kind of surrendered, what we're really saying is they gave up. They said the other team's too good for us. We kind of stopped trying. There's terms for this. If you're in wrestling and you're at a place where you can't win anymore, you can tap out. You can surrender. If you're playing chess and you're at the place where you can't win anymore, you can resign, which is surrendering. When you're having a fight with your significant other, with your spouse, with your child, and at some point you're just done, you say, I surrender. I'm done. I'm not having this fight anymore. We don't associate surrender with freedom. And here's why. The definition of surrender is to yield to the power, control, or possession of another upon compulsion or demand. In other words, they have the power, the ability to take over. And so we actually associate surrender with losing freedom. I mean, think about it. We just saw these 2 pictures. What happened when Germany and Japan surrendered? We forced them to do certain things. They had to pay reparations. There was guidelines. There was rules. There was all these things. They lost their freedom as a nation for a long time because they surrendered. They gave control up. When we think of surrender, it usually means someone won and somebody lost. Right? That's how we think of surrender in terms of wins and losses. And it puts the person surrendering in a position of humiliation and the person who's being surrendered to in a place of power and are winning. And so what we do in our culture, and particularly in the West, in our desires to be free and not to have any problem, we don't have any issues, we want to be free, we pursue whatever makes us happy. I'm just going to do what makes me happy. I'm not giving it to anybody else. You know what that is? Individualism. Or we say, no, I'm going to search for things that are going to meet my needs, the things that are going to make me the way I need to be, the people that are going to provide for me, because I'm not letting anybody else do this. And what's that? Consumerism. Or we try and get more and more to make sure that we're in control, that we're happy. Our financial position is good because I'm not going to let anybody else tell me what to do. What is that? Materialism. And we end up in bondage as slaves. And if we try and defeat these idols on our own, we're just going to be frustrated. And you're going to go through the next years thinking, oh, why can't I get past this? I don't even want to tell anybody because I've been trying to get past this particular thing for years and it doesn't work. But here's the thing. In God's kingdom, surrender is what brings freedom. And so what I want to do this morning is I want to look at an event. It's present in the scriptures, in your Bibles, from beginning to end. It's always there. It's an underlying event that happened that was celebrated through the entire history, all the way from way back in the beginning in Exodus, all the way through till Jesus' life and ministry. And it's probably a story you're familiar with, but I want to make sure we're on the same page. So let me give you a little overview of what this looks like. So God decided that he wanted to build a nation of people. He said, well, the world has decided to sin, go their own way. I'm going to bring and build this nation that's going to represent me to the world. And you remember who he started with? Abraham. So he picked Abraham, random guy, said, you're it. And if you remember the story, you know, Abraham leaves home. He ends up having his son Isaac, and then you have Jacob, and then Jacob has 12 sons. And so the family's growing. The family's getting a little bit bigger. Many years have passed. And if you remember the story, Joseph, the second youngest, kind of gets a little bit full of himself, you know, kind of starts poking a little bit at his brothers, who are all bigger, stronger, not very smart. So they finally say, look, we're done with you. They sell him into slavery. He goes off to Egypt. And you think that maybe the story of the family ends here, but it doesn't. And of course, there's this amazing story at the end of Genesis about how God puts Joseph in the right place at the right time in the right way, and he becomes the ruler of Egypt. There's a famine. His brothers come. There's this big confrontation and reconciliation, and the whole family of 70 people moves into Egypt, and they're taken care of in the midst of this famine. And then 400 years go by, and a family of 70, just a family, big family. Some of you have families almost that big, right? This family of 70 grows. Now it's no longer a family. Now it's become bigger than that. And over these years, it turns into a people, a nation, an ethnicity, a whole group of people. And so, of course, the Egyptians didn't like this. They see them getting more and more numerous. They get scared of them. They begin to press them into service. They press them into slavery. And as the time goes on, after decade after decade, after century, it just gets worse and worse and worse. And they oppress harsher. They put in new rules. They want to kill all the male babies, you know, throw them into the river. It's hard to even imagine. They just toss them. And so this goes on, and God continues to bless them, but they have never actually existed as a nation on their own, ever. Right? Egypt has, other places have, but not Israel. And so you remember the story. Moses comes up. He gets raised in the palace, even though he's born as a Hebrew. He tries to take matters into his own hands. It doesn't work, and so he spends 40 years being trained in the palace and 40 years being trained as a shepherd. And after 80 years, he has this big confrontation with God at the burning bush. He goes back, and we have the Prince of Egypt movie, right, where they have all the plagues, you know, and Charlton Heston comes in. Now he's got a white beard. He used to have a black one, right, and this whole thing, right? That's not actually biblical, right? That's just Hollywood. So, great movie. So they go through all this, and there's plague after plague after plague, because he's saying, look, you got to let the Israelites go, and the Pharaoh doesn't want to. And then, when the entire Egyptian nation is almost destitute, God says there's one more. Here's what we read. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in Egypt, this month that you're in is to be for you the first month of your year. In other words, your whole calendar is going to be based off of this event. Tell the whole community of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, each man's going to take a lamb for his family, one for each household. The animals you choose must be year-old males without defect, and you may take them from the sheep or the goats. Take care of them until the 14th day of the month, when all the members of the community of Israel must slaughter them at twilight, and they are to take some of the blood and put it on the sides and the tops of the door frames of the houses where they eat the lambs. On that same night, I will pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn of both people and animals, and I will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. And the blood will be a sign for you on the houses where you are, and when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and no destructive plague will touch you when I strike Egypt. And you all remember what happened, right? They followed the instructions, they did all these things, and that night, the angel of death that God appointed came in and killed the firstborn of the entire country of Egypt. And the Israelites were left untouched, not affected. And of course, the Egyptians, if you remember the story, were so distraught, they realized we can't do this anymore. They finally said, just go. Take anything you want, leave. Just get out of our nation. Now, here's what's interesting. If you continue reading, listen to what God says. This is a day you are to commemorate. For the generations to come, you shall celebrate it as a festival to the Lord, a lasting ordinance. In other words, you are to remember this forever. In fact, when they go into the wilderness, they get released, they go through the Red Sea, they have these miracles, and then Moses goes up in the mountain and he's getting the whole law. When God gives them the law, one of the first things he tells them is, I want you to observe this month of Aviv and celebrate the Passover of the Lord your God, because in this month he brought you out of Egypt by night, so sacrifice as the Passover to the Lord your God from an animal, and so on. He gives them more instructions. This was so significant that if you read it, he basically says, anyone who does not celebrate the Passover needs to be kicked out of the country and out of the nation. You can't be a part of it. This was serious stuff. And for the next 1,000 years, they were supposed to celebrate this. And what were they celebrating? Do you know what they were celebrating? Freedom. Deliverance. God says, look, I don't want you ever forget. And yet time and time and time again, they forgot that what they had because of God. That God gave it to them. That he was in charge, that he was in the control. And yet God would always bring it back to this festival for some reason. If they remember, they wandered in the desert for 40 years because they didn't pay attention, they didn't listen, and a whole bunch of them died. They get into the promised land, and you know what? The first thing they did was they celebrated the Passover. And that was the day manna stopped, and they began to live off the land. When Israel fell into years and decades and just of sin and problems, we read about King Josiah bringing the entire nation together to celebrate the Passover. When they'd been in Babylon in captivity for 70 years and they come back, what's the first thing they do with Ezra? They celebrate the Passover. And so by the time Jesus rolls around, what they had done is they had taken the Passover and instilled this celebration because they said, we never want to miss it again, because there were many years where they didn't do it and they were judged. They said, we're never going to let this happen again. We're going to celebrate the Passover all the time. And so Jesus grew up going to and celebrating the Passover. But here's what happened. It had become a simple religious celebration that was, I shouldn't say simple, it was a significant religious celebration, but it had some overtones that didn't work. And so if you actually read through John, he says Jesus went to 3 Passovers, and he did something significant at each one. At the first one, he overturned all the money tables, the money changers. He got all angry because they were treating the temple as a place of business and not a place of prayer. He says, you guys aren't even understanding what this is all about. You're missing the point of who God is. The next Passover, he actually feeds the 5,000. That's when that whole thing is, where he basically was reminding them that when this all happened, look, you ate this manna from heaven, but now it's me. I'm the one you should be looking to. And then at the very last Passover before he died, he spent it washing the feet of his disciples. Now, this is very significant, but why? What's going on here? What is Jesus trying to teach? Because he pays very particular attention to this celebration that they have been supposed to celebrate for 1,000 years. And it's all an illustration of, again, how they missed the whole point of all of this. Because here's the issue that is being addressed in all this, is that idolatry is sin and bondage. So when I don't know if you noticed, But when God said, I'm going to deliver you from Egypt, do you remember what he said he was going to judge? The gods of Egypt. Their idols, the things they were holding in their hearts. He wanted them to know they have no power to give you what you want. And Israel, you're going to be your own nation. You have to understand that the gods of Egypt will do nothing for you. And you think they're going to give you everything you want. It's not going to happen. I'm the one who's going to do it. I'm going to deliver you from this. The entire symbolism of the Passover was this freedom from slavery and freedom from oppression. But if you fast forward 1,000 years, do you know what the Israelites thought? They thought only in terms of Rome. We're going to celebrate the Passover because you know what? God doesn't want us to be in slavery. We are currently in slavery to Rome, so we're going to keep celebrating in the hopes that he frees us to be whoever we want to be as a nation. That's what they were thinking. That was their focus. And when Jesus came, he wanted them to understand that you're missing the point again, guys. You're focused on the here and the now. That's not what this is about. And it led to this very interesting conversation that he had with them. And he's talking to the Jews, and they had believed in him. He said, look, if you hold to my teachings, you are really my disciples. In other words, if you listen to what I teach, live the life of Jesus, do what I tell you to do, live that way. And then he says, then you'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free. You've all heard that, right? You'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free. You hear this all the time, right? It's not even a Christian saying anymore. People don't even know where they got it from, but they'd say this all the time. But what's fascinating to me is what follows in this conversation. They answered him, they said, we are Abraham's descendants, and we have never been slaves of anyone. To which Jesus must have thought, what? You were slaves in Egypt, you were slaves in Persia, you were slaves in Babylon, you were slaves to the Greek, you're now slaves to the Romans. What are you talking about? But you know what they're saying, right? We are God's. We're not slaves to anyone. We are free because we're God's chosen people, and we're just waiting till he makes it all right. How can you say we shall be set free? And look what Jesus says. Verily, truly, I tell you, everyone who sins is a slave to sin. See, they saw slavery in physical terms, and Jesus looked right through the issue and says, look, when you sin, and it's tied to idols. Idols are sin. So when we put ourselves first, when we are all about what we can get out of things, when we're focused on all these things, whenever we do that, it means someone or something else is calling the shots in your life. Every time you and I sin, it's a sign that in that moment, someone or something else is calling the shots in our lives. Jesus wants his listeners to understand that even if they were freed from Rome, to govern themselves however they wanted, which is how they saw the Passover, they would still be slaves. And he understood this principle, this idea, and this is what they had in Egypt, that idols are addictive because they promise something they can't deliver. And when they don't deliver, they begin to demand more and more and more from us, and we get caught. We get stuck in those places. So when we pursue our heart idols, we're actually less free, not more free. Let me give you an example. When the night that Jesus was betrayed, Peter, right, who had made this great promise to go with Jesus, had the complete freedom to follow Jesus or not. Remember, he went to the priest's hall, kind of followed behind, tagged along with what was going. He was completely free to do that or not do that, right? He had free to do that. He was then free to agree or disagree with the accusations that he was connected with Jesus. He could have said yes, he could have said no. In the end, he denied. And the second he denied it and used his freedom like that, he was crushed. He was wrecked. And it wasn't until Jesus supernaturally looked him in the eye, said, I love you, I accept your love, and I'm giving you purpose, that his freedom was restored. See that? His freedom did not lead, or his supposed freedom, because he pursued his own agenda, didn't lead to freedom. So here's the problem. Here's the thing. The pathway to freedom is always through surrender. This is the whole point. I don't know if you've ever thought of this idea of the Passover. So they leave Egypt. For the first time, this group of people is a nation. Like, they are on their own. They are their own people with their own agenda. They can go where they want. They can do what they want. I mean, they are finally free. And you know what the first thing God does? He says, let me give you the laws you have to live by. Think about that. If you're an Israelite, you said, look, I just went from slavery, where the Egyptians told me all the time what I had to do, how I had to do, when I had to do it, and now God's going to give me a law that says what I have to do, how I have to do, and when I have to do it. And that's why they complained. They're like, well, you just put us from one type of bondage, and now you're making us slaves again. And they completely missed the point. It's no coincidence that the first opportunity, when they didn't see Moses, they built a golden calf. They went back to idols. And what happened by Jesus' time is they had gotten so rigidly adhered to the law, they had just moved from one set of idols to the next. It was all about how do you have to live, what do you have to do, and if you do, God will approve of you, and then he'll free us from the Romans. And Jesus said, no, it's all in here. That's the whole reason I'm here, is to free you from that. And so when Jesus went to the cross, and we're going to be celebrating communion in a minute, he was demonstrating a Passover-shaped message of surrender and freedom. So this freedom is ours for the taking. We can have freedom, but it comes through surrender. And let me give you an illustration of why I think this is so powerful. Because we only access that freedom through surrender. Think of a child, right? An 8 or 9-year-old child. And they want freedom. And they want freedom to do what they want. They want to stay up as late as they want. They want to go to, they want to sleep in as long as they want. They want to watch whatever shows they want to watch on TV. They want to eat whatever food they want. That is freedom to them. And if you give them that freedom, what happens? They're tired. They're miserable. They're sick. They are staying awake, having nightmares with the things they watch that they shouldn't have watched on TV. Is that a description of a free child? Not free to enjoy life, not free to enjoy the things in front of them, not free to do all the things they want to do. But the child who says, when the parent who says, no, you're going to go to bed here, you're going to eat healthy, no, you can't watch that, this is when you're going to get up. Do you know what that child has? They have energy and all the things they need to freely enjoy life in front of them. When we grab onto our heart idols, it's exactly what we're doing. God, I just want to do my thing my way. I want to have it the way I want. I want it the way I want. And it doesn't result in freedom. It results in bondage. Because in the end, it's surrender that brings freedom. And the biggest barrier, maybe for you, I know this is what it is for me, and I think it's true for most, the biggest barrier to us surrendering is this misguided belief that if I surrender any part of my life to God, I'm going to lose something. That I'm the loser in this equation, not the winner anymore. I'm giving something up and I'm not getting anything back. That's why we don't surrender. God, if I surrender this to you, if I really gave up the problems or the issues I have with money, I'm going to be broke because you're not going to do it. Well, I have to walk up for myself. You know what? If I don't take care of me, I don't think you're going to take care of me. And everybody's going to take advantage of me and my life's going to be a mess. I can't do that. Because we have this fear that if we surrender it somehow, some way, we lose. And yet the entire message of Passover that went right from the beginning all the way up to Jesus, who fulfilled it in his death on the cross, was the message that said, you have freedom when you surrender to me. Then you have the kind of freedom. Here's the thing. When we think of freedom, there's two aspects to it. There's freedom from. These are things like, these are the idols we were just looking at. This is the freedom from being a consumer who wants to take and take, which leaves us with unsatisfied longings, from being disappointed because someone else let us down again. Free from making it about me and ending up in addiction, or free from anger, free from frustration, free from the pursuit of money and stuff, from the desire that never ends, free from the worries that I will never have enough. But it's not just that, it's so much better, because we also have freedom too. Freedom to love without reservation, to be bold without having to worry about things, to act decisively in a good way, freedom to wait with expectation, freedom to hear from God in really cool ways, freedom to engage with others without being defensive, freedom to risk and to rest. Surrender brings freedom. You know, I've been to New York City many, many times in my life. And if you've ever been there, in front of the Rockefeller Center, there's a statue. If you've ever been there, you've seen this. It's Atlas, right? Holding the world on his shoulders. Right? It's on Fifth Avenue. And he's bending over, and he's holding this, and he's just straining under the weight of the world. It's a great picture, because what's interesting is if you walk across Fifth Avenue is St. Patrick's Cathedral. And if you go in St. Patrick's Cathedral, behind one of their little stationary things is this little statue of Jesus, 7 years old, and guess what he's holding in his hand? The world. Compare them. And yet when we follow the idols, we're Atlas, we're holding everything. We think we're free, and yet it's all bearing down and we're not free. Jesus says, look, just surrender. I got it all. It's not that hard. I'm not even straining. You can have that kind of freedom. Surrender brings freedom. And so we're going to do something this morning for communion that's maybe a little different. And we're going to finish this way. You're going to come up. We're not going to pass the communion elements out. We want you to come up. But I want you to do something. Before you take the communion and go back to your seats, we have two, and if you're watching at home, you can do this easily at home. There are two clipboards or two whiteboards here. And here's what I want you to do. A whole bunch of sticky notes and pens right here. And all I want you to do is come on up, and I want you to just write on one of them the thing you want freedom from. I don't know what you struggle with. Is it, and you don't sign them, don't put your names on them. You know, is it materialism? Is it consumerism? Is it individualism? What is it? Maybe it's something else. And I want you to just write that out and put it on and just stick it to the board. This is what I want freedom from. And then I want you to stick something here that says, but here's what I want freedom to. I would love the freedom to not worry anymore. I would like the freedom to be able to actually speak my mind and not worry about what people are going to say. I would like the freedom, I don't know whatever that is. So just do those things, write it down, then come over here, take the communion and take it back to your seat. And unlike most weeks, we're not going to eat together. What I want you to do is do this when you're ready. Take the elements, and then I'm going to read us a benediction. While this is going on, Lindsay's going to be going through the song, I Surrender. So come up whenever you're ready, and at the end, if you are unable to come up, if you're not able to kind of walk up here and do this, just let us know, and we'll bring the communion to you. Okay? So let's engage in this. Let the Spirit speak to you. And then go through the physical act. There's something important about the physical act of acknowledging that this is what I need freedom from, and this is what I would like to have freedom for and to. So let's do that together.